All right, everyone. Welcome to the Addicted Mind podcast. My name is Dwayne Osterland. We are on to another episode. Today, our guest is Randall Bowman. He is a 36-year-old Indigenous business owner and woodworker. He is the survivor of a near fatal car accident. And when you hear this story, it's just unbelievable to be able to survive that and deal with his addiction and overcome multiple overdoses and really just put together recovery and come back from that. It is a story of resilience. It is a story of grit and determination. And I think Randall is just really inspiring and shows you that no matter what happens, you can change, you can get better, you can get stronger, you can get help, you can get support, and you can change. He has 5 wonderful, amazing children and some amazing friends and a wonderful wife. And it's just a great story. And I just really want to thank Randall for coming on and having the courage to share it. And I hope that you get as much as I did out of this story as well. And if you're getting a lot out of the Addicted Mind podcast, please rate and review us in iTunes. I do read them. They mean a lot to me. I just read some new ones. It kind of gives me energy to keep going and knowing that this podcast is having a positive impact. I really appreciate it. And it helps people find the podcast so they can hear stories like Randall's. And you can follow us on Instagram at Addicted Mind Podcast. So check that out as well. Okay, stay tuned for this episode. All right, everyone. Welcome to the Addicted Mind Podcast. I am with Randall Bowman. He is a 36-year-old Indigenous business owner and woodworker, which I want to talk to you more about because there's a place in my heart for woodworking. And you are in recovery, and you are Wiyot of the Bear River Band in Ronerville Rancheria in Humboldt County. Is that correct? Did I say that right?
Yep, you got it. It's the longest reservation name on the planet.
Okay, great. All right, so I want to hear your story. But first, as I was kind of saying earlier, I want to hear about your woodworking. I want to hear about the work that you do and how you got into that. And then maybe we can get into your story as well and all of that. So let's jump in.
All righty. Yeah. So I grew up, my grandpa with a shop and stuff like that. And my very first job when I was 17 was in a cabinet shop as a finisher. I was 16, so I was 18 for a couple of years there before I was legally 18 there.
Right.
You know, I've done a lot of different stuff in my life, and it's always come back. The woodworking stuff always came back. So after my car accident and getting on the real road to recovery, a more conclusive one anyway, I decided I would get back into it, and what kind of turned into some side jobs aside from the place I was working at turned into a full-time business, and we just have been kind of running with it. And luckily enough, the way that I operate, I take trees that have been felled for development purposes, because here in Reno, we're 40 minutes from Lake Tahoe. And they're building like crazy up there. So when they felled trees, if those trees aren't cut up into firewood, they're usually just kind of thrown in landfills or left in the forest someplace. So I pick up the trees, let them dry, and then I mill them into slabs. And whatever furniture pieces I make, all the offcut pieces we make into small benches or cutting boards or things that we can raffle off different charity events to raise some money for the community.
Oh, that is awesome. I mean, that sounds so cool. And the reason I love woodworking is when I met my wife like 20 years ago, she helped facilitate at a community college, the woodworking department. And so we would go into there and build things. I didn't know anything about woodworking at all, but, so I love it. And it's such a amazing craft. I just got to see some amazing things built out of wood that you would never imagine. It's just so cool.
It is crazy. And there's something very meditative about woodworking because it requires so much focus.
Yeah.
I think it's really helpful. There's a program that me and my friends are kind of tossing around right now where I want to try to get a bunch of tools together and do some classes with people that are either getting out of long-term jail sentences or getting out of rehab, so they can get into just making spoons. If you can make a spoon,
Yeah.
you can learn a lot about woodworking just by making that spoon.
Yeah. And there's something about doing that task that is so amazing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's great stuff, and I wouldn't call it addictive necessarily, but it definitely takes over a ton of time once you get into it.
Which is all about recovery, right? Doing the things that are meaningful to you and creating the things that are beautiful to you and spending your time in ways that are just good and bring joy. So let's go back then and let's start to hear some of your story and kind of how you got to this place that you're describing now.
Yeah, so I grew up on a small ranch out in the North Valleys of Reno for the first 10 years of my life. So we raised pigs and slaughtered them. And that's what we did. My mom was a barrel racer. My dad did ridiculously hard work. He ran a water well. He drilled for water wells, sorry.
Right.
Then moving forward, we left there after a pretty serious case of abuse for me, my brother and sister, not from my parents, but from another family member on the property. So we left there, and as a family of 5, we were homeless for, I say, a month, I think, until we got our trailer into the trailer park in which I spent the rest of my childhood, which was another pretty terribly low income neighborhood. But my mom was kind of the caretaker of the kids, so all of our friends were always around. And once I started getting into high school stuff like that, picked up music and skateboarding, and early on, 10, 11, 12, we started finding different ways to use, me and my friends. And it was so strange how much better I felt when I used, even at that age, drinking at 11 or 12, or doing amphetamines or whatever it was. And it didn't really make sense to me then. It was just fun. And, we kept moving on, and I started getting really serious about skateboarding. I ended up getting hurt. I got hit by a car, and about a year later went to the doctor, and they said, "Oh, well, you definitely need morphine and Xanax and Percocet." So, and I was 16. So at the time,
and it's such a time of brain development. You're getting these hardcore narcotics when you're 16 years old, and your brain is still just growing.
Yeah, and it was weird because I didn't realize addiction was a thing. I was convinced that I could get through it. I wouldn't get addicted because I was different. So after I got kicked out of high school and just went straight to work at 16, moved out of my parents' house, and my parents maybe didn't do things very well, but they didn't have a playbook. Nobody told them how to do this thing that is parenting and growing up. They were kids when they had me. Yeah. And, instead of trying to lay all that baggage on them, like my mistakes were theirs, I'd much rather talk about the fact that my dad is now 7 years sober. Him and my mom are back together. They are the best grandparents to all 5 of my kids, all 2 or 3 of my brothers, and 4 of my sisters. So
that's amazing. I love hearing stories like that because it just shows you that, just hope is so possible. Like, we can change, we can do things differently.
Absolutely. And it's huge. And it's huge for people. It's huge for me and my brother and sister to see, because my brother and sister didn't go the same path as me, but they still struggled with the same things. I mean, it's all in our epigenetics and things of that nature. It's encoded in us in one way or another. So by the time I was 18, I was using every single weekend, every day. I was selling. I was deep in it. And I stopped at 18 for a girl and spent a few years kind of getting it together. And when that ended, there was me and my adopted brother's house, there was a home invasion that happened that really kind of took my psyche and just twisted it up. And
wow.
After that, luckily no one was killed, but I was severely hurt. My adopted brother's girlfriend was severely injured. And the paranoia was so out of control after that, because I went from being invincible to just always, because I was already an anxious person, which is kind of why a lot of different drugs helped me, because it took that edge off, because there was no processing in my family or anything like
that having an event like that, and if you're already an anxious person, having a traumatic event like that just kind of amplifies it and spirals it.
Absolutely. So that was intense. So then that's when the drinking went from every weekend to every day to all day with a couple Xanax at a time. And that's kind of how I tried to function through those 4 or 5. I was like 3 years. I got down to like 115 pounds. I was a mess. So I decided I was going to get off of that and everything else. So I was on Lamictal. I was on Xanax. I was still taking painkillers. I was drinking constantly. So then I just stopped. And it was really, I had several seizures from either the DTs, the benzos, the psych meds.
Yeah. Really, really dangerous stuff there.
And I spent that week alone. I figured I was just going to tough it out. I did not realize the severity of these chemicals. And I learned very quickly in that week. So I think
I think that's an important message out there, because people don't realize like how dangerous it can be with some of these drugs to detox, and why you need professional help, because it can get really, really life-threatening, dangerous. I think that's just an important point to really make.
No, for sure. And when you're in the middle of it, you are so sick and so handicapped in that moment that you can't call for help. You can't do anything. You're physically unable to move for the most part. And it's very, very important to seek help before you start making those big decisions.
Yeah. And there's people out there that want to help you. I mean, that's so important.
All over
like
the
you,
place.
Right.
Right. And so I did that, and then I ended up getting better. And at that point was when my girlfriend got pregnant with my son. And that ended up being really ugly when he was born. They did a lot of things that maybe they shouldn't have, and I wasn't able to see him.
Oh.
So that tore me apart. So I went off the deep end again, and it was a lot of prescription pills. There was when the opioid epidemic really hit its peak, when it came to prescribing, and it was not difficult to get a bunch of 30 milligram Percocet anywhere you went.
Yeah.
So I was fully taking advantage of that situation. I was doctor shopping, things of that nature. And then I wanted to give everything a shot. So then I went to rehab the first time. I went to Michael's house in Palm Springs, and I went in under the notion, look, I just need to get away from everybody for 30 days, 60 days. I'm not doing any of this therapy BS. I don't need it.
Right. But I guess a part of you like knew it, but didn't want to do it, but knew it. It's that internal, that internal wrestle that, I think we all on some level have, right? It's like, well, I'm just going to do this, but you kind of a part of you knows like, I really need this, but I don't really want it. And wow.
Yeah.
I'm glad you walked in there.
So hard. And they were great. I had a counselor. I can't remember his name now, but he cracked me.
Oh, good.
And it was, I learned so many of the tools that kept me alive for, the 6-7 years after that.
Yeah.
And I came out of there feeling really, really good about everything. Got back into trying to get custody of my son, and was good for 2 years, I think. And then I got hurt and tore my meniscus. Some guys started trouble in a casino on 4th of July, and I was not going to take the Norcos. I was like, no, 1 will turn into 6, 6 will turn into my life being ruined. But then I did, and it did, much like it does every time, because I'm just not the type of person that can do those kinds of things safely. It's 0 or 150%, no matter what it is.
There's no in between for you. There's like, if I'm doing this, I'm going all the way this direction, or I'm going all the way this direction, and that's how you have to live your life.
Mm-hmm. And I tried to lie to myself quite a bit, because these things, recovery and sobriety and things like that, would be so much easier if the narcotics didn't make you feel so much better.
Yeah,
that's the hardest thing to really wrestle with. And through that, getting back into the prescription pills, in custody for my son, I was given legal advice saying that, like, you're probably never going to get custody. It's probably never going to happen. And at that point, I was like, then what am I doing here then? What am I even doing? And that's when I took the leap into heroin. And then shortly thereafter, intravenous use of heroin and methamphetamines. And I attempted, it got really, really bad, actually. If I can just kind of slow down before I jump into the San Francisco stuff. It got really bad. And I ended up having a full, very serious overdose in my parents' house at 30 years old. And or 29 years old, sorry. And which is just, of all the life I've lived and all the things I've done, that is the one thing that I do still makes me cringe, because my dad had to give me mouth and CPR for about 25, 30 minutes waiting for the ambulance, and I was barely hanging on. It took 2 full vials of Narcan to even get me breathing. And then we go to the hospital, get out of the hospital, and then I overdose again that very next day. And then it was like, okay, well, what are you going to do? Do we have to just let you go and die? Because we can't watch you do it like this. Or do you want to get better? So then we set up an appointment to go up and spend 30 to 90 days in Friendship House in San Francisco. And I went up there, and I had a huge abscess on my wrist. And I had to get that drained up there and everything. And there's this whole commotion with this. I had to go get my prescription, and they told me to grab a kid that had been there. So I did, or he said he had been there. I didn't know he had already caused trouble. And so when I left with him, they thought I had just left.
Oh.
And so when I came back, they were like, you can't come in. Like, you left. And I was like, but you told me to leave.
Right. So like, wait a minute, what's going on?
Misunderstanding. And so then I was homeless in San Francisco just like that.
Wow.
And of course had to call my parents and tell them also that I had just left. And so my parents were like, we can't do it anymore. And rightfully so. It was killing them. My dad he had just gotten sober. And if he was going to hang on, they had to take a step back.
Yeah, that's so hard. I mean, like you said, at the time, it's probably so hard to understand, but, with hindsight and some recovery under your belt, you can understand their position, but, that's so tough for everybody.
At the time, I was like, wait, but what do I do? And they're like, I don't know. I don't know what you're going to do. And so I spent the first 7 days, stayed clean for about 7 days, trying to talk to the counselor at the rehab, and it just wasn't going to happen. So then I had to figure out how to be homeless in San Francisco. And I grew up in Reno, so I didn't know the city. And it's a complete culture shock, because Reno is so different than most other places.
Yeah.
So then I started using again, and it was 2 years I spent out there homeless.
Wow.
And I kind of survived by playing guitar in the BART station downtown. And I would just play guitar and sing because I grew up playing music and stuff. So I would survive that way. And that
Wow.
city, people have been talking about it more, the issue in San Francisco. But that is literally just the very tip of the iceberg. That there's so much death and violence and just sadness in that city right now.
That's
very
so
severe.
heartbreaking. And I just imagine for you, I'm just trying to imagine that situation of just being there and, the desperation, the uncertainty, the unknown, here you are trying to get clean, but you can't get clean. And oh my gosh.
So that went for a while. And eventually I decided I had an overdose on the beach. And at that time, my cousin had contacted me up on the reservation and said, "Hey, I have a safe house. Do you want to try to get clean?" And after the overdose, I was like, "Yeah, let's do it." So I went up there and dry detoxed for a week and a half, and got a job with the tribe up there in Humboldt.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, I had kind of started talking to my family again. So about 30 days in, I wanted to come home to Reno and say hi to everybody, and then I was going to go back up. So some girls drove up, and they had drove through the night, so I drove their car back down. And at one point, we were coming around one of these turns up in the mountain pass, and somebody had come in our lane. And when I swerved, we hit some mud, we spun out, and went off the cliff.
Oh, my goodness.
And we went off the cliff, and the car was flipping down into the canyon. I didn't have my seatbelt on, so I was all over the cab of the vehicle. And once we hit a tree, the tree ripped the driver's door off, and then I got kind of slingshotted out. And then eventually the car caught up to me going down into the canyon, rolled over me twice. It rolled over me once, and then I kind of got tangled up in it, and then it folded me in half against a bunch of trees. And the car carried on down into the canyon, and the girls, everybody was safe. They all had their seatbelts on and everything. But they found me up on the hill with my right heel behind the back of my head. And I woke up to them calling my name. And once they got to me, she had to pull my leg out from under me because it was raining. My head was cocked back, so I was drowning. All the water was running down my nose. Luckily, when we went off, there was a guy behind us, and he called 911 immediately. So I really only had to wait 15 minutes for care flight, but it took them about 10 or more minutes to get down because the grade was almost a straight drop. And
oh my goodness,
by the time they got me on the cot, I bled out because I had a softball size hole in my skull, and my arm had almost got cut off completely. So I woke up in the hospital and thought I was in Reno because I had suffered some pretty bad frontal lobe damage. So my short-term memory was gone. My last memory when I was in the hospital was from 3 years prior. Wow. So they had to tell me what happened. I spent a day on life support, 3 days in ICU. I had broken my right femur in about a dozen pieces. I powdered my pelvis all the way across. I broke both of my hips. I broke every single one of my ribs. I ruptured my spleen. I crushed my heart, my left lung. I crushed my skull. Like I said, a hole, but the crack itself started at the base of my skull and all the way up.
Oh my goodness.
Around here, my arm, all the muscles and tendons were saved, but it was barely hanging on. And I think that was everything. So the people at Mercy Hospital in Redding were awesome. They did such a good job. Fast forward to coming home with brain damage, and I had gotten clean, and then I woke up in the hospital completely confused, getting pumped full of Dilaudid. Then I was like, what the hell, man?
Right.
I cannot get away from it.
But I mean, you have to have that pain medication at the same time because you can't survive without it. So,
Absolutely.
it's, oh my goodness.
But in the hospital when I was in Reading, they told me, look, it's going to be 3 years before you're on a walker. You're going to be in a wheelchair for at least a year and a half. You're never going to skateboard again. You're probably never going to run, jump, skip, karate kick, but you'll probably get walking. So in the hospital there, I couldn't move my legs, but I was pulling them up with my hands and then pushing them back down just to get movement.
Right.
Came to Reno in a wheelchair, ran away from my mom and dad's house in a wheelchair, and decided I was going to try to take care of myself. And that's when I got with who's now my wife. And she was like, what are you doing, man? Because we knew each other from before. And we had started talking when I came back home. And she saw that I had left and I went to one of the hotels here in Reno. And she was working there. And she's like, what are you doing? You can't be alone. Like, what are you doing? And she was like, look, I will stick with you through all this, but not if you're going to dive back down. I can't do that. Because she has her own recovery story that she had just, she was doing well.
Right.
So I chose her, and to give it a shot, she was an in-home care nurse prior to her job there. So she helped me get my legs moving. She knew I was going to try to get up before I was supposed to. So she tried to keep it safe. And it was supposed to be a year and a half in the wheelchair. And at 6 weeks, I stood up.
Wow.
And started shuffling. And then at 10 weeks, I went back to work.
Wow.
Just at a warehouse, the Tesla warehouse out here. And I still had all my hardware in, those bolts in my knee and tailbone and all of that. And I kind of recovered by just walking Tesla and working that, and went to the next step was to get a fabrication job, because I was just trying to work my way back into woodworking. And I was like, and at the fabrication shop, I was feeling good. So I was like, you know what? I think I could probably skateboard again. So the funny story is I went out and went skating and was doing pretty well and got a little confident, fell and broke my hand. So
jeez.
the only thing
it
that
doesn't
break
stop.
In the car accident.
Oh my God.
So in that, my wife and I, we got married shortly after we got together and had our first daughter, who's now 4. Then got custody of my son, finally. Then we had our second daughter, who is now 2. And then my wife has my stepson, who's 12 from a past relationship. So we got our kids, and then we just hit the ground running. Once we were sharing a couch in the 1-bedroom apartment. Then we worked our way to my parents' house. Then from there, into our house. And then once we kind of got the reins in our hands, we're good. The sobriety thing. So I'm sorry, I'm all over the place.
That's okay.
So 3 months after the car accident, I wanted to get off the pain meds because I was already starting to abuse them, and I knew that that was just
you knew.
And my wife said, "Why don't you try getting on a Suboxone program?"
Yeah.
And so I went and talked to the only doctor here in Reno that has a program, and got on that, and it saved my life.
That's amazing. That is so
I know
great.
it's difficult for people to kind of understand the Suboxone thing, because obviously doing abstinence recovery would be key, right? You would want no medications. You would want to be able to do that. But
these medications, these medications can be, like you're an example. These medications can be lifesavers, and Absolutely. They are, they can be so incredibly helpful because, you're dealing with the neurochemistry of the brain, and addiction affects that, and it affects our motivation, it affects our decision making, and these drugs can help with that.
Absolutely, and it did, and it served, whether it was a mental thing, or it served as help with the pain.
Yeah.
Because although I was able to get up and walk and do all that very quickly, it didn't mean that it wasn't terribly painful.
Right.
And so that program was huge for me. It was huge. And once we kind of moved past that, and then we both spent a lot of time in therapy and rehab.
Mm-hmm.
And so we would just constantly process. Every time either one of us was having a rough day, it was, let's figure it out.
Yep.
And that was the ingredients to success, was just somebody to be completely genuine and honest with. And the medications to just give you that safety net, if anything.
Yeah, absolutely. And you pull all those
Such a
pieces
big
together, right? You pull therapy, a supportive community, medication, you pull all of it in and use all the tools you can get. And plus, I'm just going to say your grit. I mean, you sound like a person that just has grit. Like you've got grit. And so in combination with all those things, grit and all of these things, it sounds like you were really able to, dig in and get recovery, not just sobriety, but recovery, because you got to do the mental work too, which is hard.
Yeah. Oh, that's the hardest part.
Yeah.
That's the hardest part.
Yeah, it is.
It really is. And, and then it gets into the more juicy stuff, the good stuff, where we're now in a position where we are good. Our kids are safe and happy. And now we're branching out and doing our best to start programs and trying to help as many people as we can.
Yeah.
And using, whether it's my woodworking or my wife's a professional makeup artist, and using those things to just help people and really just be honest with people and try to get them to just be honest with you.
Yeah.
And then point them in the direction to just, with zero judgment, because I think a lot of it, there's so much shame involved in addiction, so much shame. It's so hard to be like, yeah, I did all of this stuff, but I'm trying, I want to get better. I do. I don't think I can, but I want to.
Yeah. And having that in supportive environment, getting rid of the stigma of addiction, you telling your story does that, right? Because someone's going to hear this story and understand, like, oh, I was there too. And this guy Randall is talking about it. And look, he's changed. He's done something different. Maybe I can have that hope too. And like, there is hope. Yeah, you can.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's very important to try to level with people instead of going in, talking to a group of patients, being like, look, I was a drunk. Now I'm a millionaire. You can do it. Just do it.
Right.
Maybe let's take a different angle.
Yeah.
It's really important. And there's a lot of people that want the help, but they're just scared, man. They're just scared.
Yeah. Well, like you said, that shame, it keeps us from reaching out. It stops us from getting the help because our own pride and shame gets in the way. And so we don't do it. And then we don't get the support we need. And we continue that cycle. And I think, like you said, it's like, there are people out there that want to help you, like now. And I'm sure, I would imagine there were people along this road that helped you too, and had their own story.
Absolutely. And it was those little things, even if just a small gesture would get me through a week when I was homeless out there, get me through 2 weeks, just being like, look, maybe it's not all terrible. And it's the work that the work you guys are doing is huge. It's huge. These kinds of conversations are so important to just keep this issue relevant and keep it in the forefront of everybody's mind, because it's not going to get better on its own.
Nope. No, it won't. We have to do this work. And so, kind of coming back around where we started our conversation, just now you're living, it sounds like, a life that you feel really good in, not that it doesn't have problems, like life's problems still, problems still show up, they still show up, but you've got the resources and skills to manage them, talk about them, work them out, figure them out.
Yeah. It's huge. And it's all in remaining honest with yourself. And if you can remain honest with yourself, you can be honest with the person closest to you, and then work your way out to being just honest with anybody you talk to, because there's nothing wrong with the mistakes that you made, is because you're trying to fix them. That's the difference.
Yeah,
it might take a million tries, dozens and dozens of tries, but that one will stick. So getting back into woodworking, and then my wife doing the great work she's doing in makeup and everything like that, we're starting to build really good foundations for programs that we're trying to start, and different music programs for the Washoe County School District. And my wife is working with women that have suffered severe domestic violence and things of that nature. It's just taking all of that energy, because something people do forget about addiction and people that have drug issues is they are the most motivated people on the planet.
Yep.
They will do some things. And if you can just take a percentage of that momentum and put it towards something positive, whether it's just yourself or your health and your safety, and then work your way up to helping other people.
Absolutely.
Big deal.
Yeah. So we're on our time here. One
Ready?
question I love to ask, and I know you've listened to the podcast, so maybe you've heard this question before. Someone out there, they're struggling, they're hurting, they're in pain, they're in a dark space, and you could tell them one thing. What would you want them to know?
I'd want them to know that, yes, it's not just you. This sucks, and it's really, really hard. And no one is going to understand how hard it is. No matter how you try to explain it, no one's going to get it. But if you just accept the help and the security of the people around you that want to understand, and you just do it one step at a time, one little thing after another, it feels like a lifetime in the moment, because this hole feels so deep, but your head's still above water.
Oh, thank you.
That's it.
Thank you, Randall. And if people want to connect with you, how can they find you? What can they do?
Yeah. Let's see. I'm on Instagram at Rose Lee Woodworking. And TikTok is Randall B. And Facebook is Randall B. And
awesome.
Yeah, I'd love to talk to anybody that wants to talk about helping people.
Yeah, and I will put all those links and that information in the show notes at theaddictedmind.com, so you can check them out there. Randall, just thank you for doing what you're doing and coming on and sharing your story and letting your story help others out there. Absolutely. Thank you guys for what you're doing. It's a big deal, and I hope we talk again soon and have some cool new stories for you. Awesome, Randall. Thanks. All right, everyone. Thank you for listening to the Addicted Mind podcast. As usual, all the links will be at theaddictedmind.com in the show notes, so go check them out. And if you got a lot out of this episode today, share it with a friend. And don't forget, click the subscribe button in whatever podcast app you use. Okay, have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll talk to you on the next episode.